I am Sergeant Lexi Wood. I'm 28 years old, and I serve in the United States Army. The greatest irony of my life is that I swore an oath to sacrifice my life for the honor of this country. Yet my own family treated the most important day of my life like a disgrace. They called my wedding a trivial event for a common soldier and chose not to come. Instead, they went on vacation to Hawaii with my sister, a successful lawyer. The first call I received from them afterward wasn't an apology. They called only because they needed something. Their words taught me a valuable lesson about family boundaries and self-respect. Before I share my story, let me know what city you're listening from, and like and subscribe if you believe that the toughest battles are sometimes fought right at home. The autumn air in Virginia's Shenandoah Valley was crisp, carrying the scent of wine grapes and damp earth. Golden leaves drifted down from the oak trees, blanketing the grounds of the rustic winery where I was about to marry the love of my life, Caleb. Everything was supposed to be perfect. And for a moment, it was. I stood at the back of the outdoor aisle, my arm linked through that of my commanding officer. A man with 3 daughters of his own, he'd stepped in when my own father wouldn't. My hands, hidden in the folds of my simple, elegant wedding dress, were steady. My breathing was controlled. I was a soldier, trained to perform under pressure. This, I told myself, was just another mission. As the music began, a soft string quartet playing a familiar melody, we started our walk. I kept my eyes fixed on Caleb, standing at the altar with a smile that could calm any storm. But my peripheral vision betrayed me. It scanned the front row, the seats reserved for my family. My father, Preston Wood, a prestigious D.C. lawyer. My mother, Dr. Victoria Wood, the Dean of Humanities at Georgetown. My sister, Cassie, the golden child. The row was empty. It wasn't just empty space. It was a cold, gaping void. A vacuum that sucked all the warmth out of the autumn air. The silence from that empty row was a condemnation, louder and more brutal than any words they could have ever spoken. I felt the pitying glances from Caleb's family, from my friends, from my brothers and sisters in arms. Their sympathy felt like salt on a wound I didn't even know was still bleeding. I took a deep, steadying breath, forcing the lump in my throat down. I would not break. Not here, not now. I focused on Caleb's eyes, my anchor in the storm, and I completed the mission. I walked down that aisle, I said my vows, and I became his wife. But the shadow of that empty row lingered, a dark stain on the brightest day of my life. That night, in a cozy log cabin nestled in the woods, I couldn't sleep. Caleb was beside me, his steady breathing a comforting rhythm in the quiet room. But my mind was a battlefield. Around 2 a.m., I gave up, slipping out of bed and grabbing my phone. It was a mistake, an act of self-sabotage I couldn't seem to stop. I opened Instagram. And there it was. My sister, Cassie, had just posted a new photo series. The first image felt like a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. My father, mother, and Cassie were all there, beaming on a white sand beach. Behind them, the sky was a brilliant, cinematic explosion of purple and orange, a Maui sunset. Dad was wearing a breezy Tommy Bahama shirt, the kind he only wore on expensive vacations. Mom looked regal in a silk maxi dress, and Cassie was, as always, perfect, posing in a designer bikini. They were laughing, holding champagne flutes, looking utterly carefree. Then I read the caption, "Recharging with the ones who truly matter. Family first. Hawaii life. The ones who truly matter." The words echoed in the silent cabin. Each one was a perfectly aimed dagger. So, what was I? If they were the ones who mattered, then I was nothing. The hashtag felt like a sick joke. Family first. Whose family? Clearly not mine. My wedding day, the day I had started my own family, was the day they chose to publicly declare that I wasn't part of theirs. My hand trembled as I hit my mother's contact. It was late in Hawaii, but I didn't care. She answered on the 3rd ring, her voice thick with annoyance. "Lexi, do you have any idea what time it is here?" There were no congratulations, no questions about the wedding, just irritation. I saw the pictures, I said, my own voice shaking, betraying the soldier's discipline. Hawaii looks beautiful. There was a pause. Oh, that, she said dismissively. It was a last-minute surprise from Cassie for your father and me, a rare opportunity for us all to relax. The casualness of her tone broke something inside me. A rare opportunity? I finally broke, tears streaming down my face. What about my wedding? Mom, it was my wedding day. You could have said no to Cassie. The silence on the other end of the line was glacial. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold as steel, stripped of all pretense of maternal warmth. Lexi, don't be so childish. Your sister has worked incredibly hard to get where she is. We couldn't sacrifice her happiness and a trip to the Four Seasons for your little ceremony. Your little ceremony, that's all it was to them. An insignificant, trivial event. I didn't say another word, I just ended the call. I didn't scream, I didn't throw the phone against the wall. The pain was too immense, too profound. It bypassed anger entirely and settled into a cold, clean numbness. I sat on the edge of the bed in the darkness, motionless. My military training had taught me how to compartmentalize, how to function in the most stressful situations imaginable. And this, right here, was the most stressful situation of my life. The truth was a precise, tactical strike. I was no longer their daughter. I was a target that had been eliminated. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, staring into the darkness, letting the raw, brutal truth reshape me. It was forging me into someone harder, colder, and more resolute than I had ever been before. As the first hint of dawn filtered through the cabin window, my gaze fell upon the corner of the room. My elegant white wedding shoes lay on the floor, and beside them, my scuffed, mud-stained combat boots stood at attention. One represented the life I thought I wanted, and the other, the life I actually had. That night, I understood they could never truly exist in the same room. The sun was beginning to rise, casting long gray shadows across the floor of the cabin. I hadn't moved. My gaze remained fixed on the corner where my two lives sat side by side, the delicate white wedding shoes and the scuffed, unyielding leather of my combat boots. It was the contrast that held me captive. The pristine white against the worn, scarred brown. And looking at those wedding shoes, so perfect and out of place, I was pulled back into a memory I had tried to bury. It was always about shoes, specifically my sister Cassie's shoes. Louboutins, Manolos, Jimmy Choos. I spent my entire childhood looking up at her, perched on pedestals of expensive leather, while I stood firmly on the ground, invisible. That ground was in Potomac, Maryland, in a sprawling brick colonial with white pillars and a lawn so perfectly manicured it looked like a green carpet. Our house wasn't a home, it was a showroom. A stage set for the grand performance of the Wood family. Every piece of furniture, every painting was chosen to impress. The heart of this stage was the living room, and on its main wall hung what my parents proudly called the Wall of Accomplishments. It was a shrine to my sister. Gilded frames held Cassie's honor roll certificates, her debate team trophies, newspaper clippings about her mock trial victories, and a prominent glossy photo of her shaking a senator's hand. There wasn't a single empty space. And there wasn't a single photo or certificate with my name on it. My existence, it seemed, was not an accomplishment. My sanctuary was the small, finished attic room, a world away from the curated perfection below. The walls weren't decorated with awards. They were covered in maps of the world, pushpins marking places of historical significance. I spent my hours there reading military history, from the Spartans to the conflicts in the Middle East. It was a world that fascinated me, a world my parents dismissed as my odd little hobby. Dinner at the Wood family home wasn't a time for connection. It was a nightly deposition. My father, Preston, would sit at the head of the polished mahogany table and conduct his cross-examination. Cassie always went first, and she was always prepared. I got an A+ on my constitutional law midterm, she'd announce casually. Professor Albright said my analysis was on par with a 3L student. My father would beam, a rare, genuine smile. That's my girl. Tell me about your argument regarding the Commerce Clause. Then, the spotlight would reluctantly turn to me. And you, Lexi? What did you accomplish today? One evening, I felt a flicker of pride. I was voted captain of the varsity volleyball team. My father nodded slowly, taking a sip of his wine. Good for you. Sports build discipline, he said, the words a hollow, pre-written script. Then, without missing a beat, he turned back to my sister. Now, Cassie, about that moot court strategy. And just like that, I was erased. I learned to keep my answers short, my achievements small. I learned that my world, a world of teamwork and physical grit, was simply not on the same level as Cassie's intellectual stage. I learned to be silent. The chasm between us became a canyon my senior year of high school. Cassie, in her final year at Georgetown, received her acceptance letter to Yale Law. It was the crown jewel for my parents' collection. They threw a lavish cocktail party at their country club, a catered affair with an open bar and a string quartet. The guest list was a who's who of DC's legal and academic elite. I remember standing in a corner, watching my parents glow as they accepted congratulations on their daughter's brilliant future. A few weeks later, it was my turn to graduate from high school. There was no party, no string quartet. My gift from them was a $100 check left on the kitchen counter with a sticky note attached. Congratulations, honey. Mom has an important faculty event. Can't miss it. We're proud of you. I celebrated my graduation with 3 of my closest friends at a local pizza joint. I didn't cry. I didn't feel angry. I just felt empty. A profound, hollow emptiness, as if I was a ghost in my own life story. But amidst those cold, echoing memories, there was one point of warmth. My grandfather. He passed away when I was 15, but his influence was the bedrock of my life. He was a Marine Corps veteran, a tough, quiet man who had fought at Iwo Jima. He didn't care about report cards or Ivy League prestige. He saw something else in me, a steadiness, a steel in my spine that others overlooked. The last time I saw him, he was frail, lying in a sterile hospital bed that seemed too small for his spirit. He grabbed my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. His voice was a rasp, a whisper that carried the weight of a lifetime. Lexi, he said, his eyes locking onto mine. Don't ever let anyone tell you a warrior's heart is a small thing. It's the most valuable thing you'll ever have. Those words became my true inheritance. They were my compass, my North Star. They were the reason that, a week after my lonely graduation party, I walked into a U.S. Army recruitment office in downtown Silver Spring. The air smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. The sergeant on duty looked tired, but he listened. He didn't ask about my grades or my sister. He asked if I was ready to serve. I remember the feeling of the pen in my hand as I signed the enlistment papers. The cheap ballpoint felt heavier than any trophy. Each letter of my signature was a deliberate act of defiance. It was a final, silent answer to the years of being overlooked, to the wall of accomplishments where my name never appeared. It was my first true declaration of independence, a vow to build my own legacy of honor instead of waiting for one from them. That signature on my enlistment papers was a declaration of independence, but the road to freedom was paved with exhaustion and loneliness. The years that followed were a crucible. I remember the endless nights at AIT, Advanced Individual Training, at Fort Huachuca, Arizona. The desert air was thin and cold before dawn, the silence of the landscape broken only by the sharp commands of our instructors and the thud of our boots on the dusty ground. I was training to be an intelligence analyst, a job that required a different kind of toughness than I'd ever known. It demanded meticulous attention to detail, the ability to see patterns in chaos, and an unwavering mental fortitude. I pushed myself harder than anyone else, often studying while others slept, determined to prove that I belonged there. And in that world, I did. For the first time in my life, my value wasn't measured by my family's name or the prestige of my education. It was measured by my competence, my integrity, and my commitment to the soldier next to me. I earned my stripes. I was promoted quickly, becoming a respected sergeant. I had finally found a place where my skills mattered. but every phone call home was a painful reminder of the world I'd left behind. "I made Sergeant, Mom," I'd say, trying to keep the pride out of my voice. "Oh, that's nice, dear," she'd reply, her tone distant. "Did you know your sister just won a major case? It was featured in the New York Law Journal. Your father is so proud." My accomplishments were always just a stepping stone to talk about Cassie's. I was a footnote in the grand story of the Wood family. The distance between Arizona and Maryland wasn't just miles, it was entire galaxies of worth. Then, on a short leave, my galaxy shifted. I drove up to Fredericksburg, Virginia, a historic town with a vibrant art scene. I was wandering through their famous craft market, breathing in the smell of leather and handmade soap, when I saw his booth. It was filled with the most beautiful handcrafted wooden furniture, cutting boards with intricate inlays, smooth sculpted rocking chairs, and a magnificent walnut dining table that looked like a work of art. The man behind the table had sawdust in his hair and a smile that was as warm and genuine as the wood he worked with. His name was Caleb. His hands were calloused but gentle as he showed me the grain on a piece of cherry wood. He didn't ask me what I did for a living or where I went to school. He asked what kind of trees I liked. We talked for hours, leaning against his workbench. He spoke about his passion for carpentry, a skill passed down from his father. I found myself opening up in a way I never had, telling him about my work, my team, and the sense of purpose I'd found. When I mentioned I was a soldier, he didn't flinch or offer empty platitudes like, "Thank you for your service." Instead, he looked at me, his eyes filled with a quiet respect. "Wow," he said, his voice sincere. "You must be a very disciplined and trustworthy person." It was the simplest of compliments, yet it landed with more weight than any academic award my parents had ever praised. Our relationship bloomed from there, as naturally as a tree grows towards the sun. Caleb was everything my family was not. He was grounded, unpretentious, and valued character above all else. When I finally found the courage to tell him about the constant comparisons, the wall of accomplishments, the cold dismissiveness, he didn't try to defend them. He just listened, his expression growing more serious. When I finished, he took my hand and said, "I'm so sorry you had to go through that, Lexi. They have no idea what they're missing out on." With Caleb, I felt seen, truly seen, for the first time. He came to visit me at Fort Belvoir one afternoon. He wasn't intimidated by the uniformed guards or the strict protocols. He was just curious, asking questions about the different insignias on the soldiers we passed. We sat in the drab base cafeteria, and he asked about my work. As I tried to explain the complexities of intelligence analysis in simple terms, he listened with rapt attention. When I was done, he just shook his head in admiration. "I've never met anyone as strong as you," he said, his voice full of awe. "What you do every day, it really matters." Tears welled in my eyes. It really matters. That one sentence was the validation I had spent my entire life craving from my family, and here it was, offered so freely from a man with sawdust on his jeans. His love was the antidote I never knew I needed, which made the inevitable introduction to my family a guaranteed disaster. We met at a high-end steakhouse in D.C., the kind with white tablecloths and waiters who call you sir and ma'am. The air was thick with the scent of money and power. My father, Preston, didn't even pretend to be interested. He immediately launched his interrogation. "So, Caleb," he began, swirling the wine in his glass, "what's your educational background?" Caleb met his gaze without flinching. "I learned the trade from my father, sir. I built my business from the ground up." My father just smirked, a small cruel twist of his lips. Then my mother, Victoria, chimed in, her voice dripping with condescension. "And does that sort of manual labor pay the bills?" Caleb's calm never wavered. "It's enough to live an honest and happy life, ma'am," he replied with a quiet dignity that was lost on them. For the rest of the meal, they directed all their conversation to Cassie, who had come down from New York. They talked about her firm, her new Manhattan apartment, and a charity gala they were planning. Caleb and I were completely ignored, as if we were ghosts at their table. The anger simmering inside me was so hot I could barely eat. As we left the restaurant and stepped into the cool night air, Caleb took my hand. "It's okay," he said softly, seeing the storm in my eyes. "I'm here for you, not for them." In that moment, I understood the profound difference between the family you're born into and the family you choose. He wasn't impressed by their power. He was proud of my strength. It's an incredible feeling when someone sees the real you, past all the noise and expectation. We all deserve someone who sees our true worth. If you have a Caleb in your life, a partner, a friend, a mentor who truly gets you, press that like button and let me know by commenting with a single heart emoji below. His unwavering support gave me a courage I didn't know I had. I remembered something our Army chaplain once said during a service. Faith isn't the absence of fear, it's taking action in the face of it. I looked at Caleb, my rock, my ally, and a new resolve hardened within me. We were going to get married, and they were going to know. I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over my mother's name. My hand was perfectly steady. It's time to tell them. My hand was steady as I tapped my mother's name on the screen. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I'd timed the video call perfectly to catch them all at home, relaxed. Caleb sat beside me on our small sofa, his presence a silent source of strength. A fragile hope flickered within me. Maybe this time, it would be different. Maybe the joy of an engagement would be enough to bridge the gap. Their faces popped up on my phone screen, a triptych of polite indifference. My mother, Victoria, in her home office at Georgetown, framed by shelves of leather-bound books. My father, Preston, in his favorite armchair, the Wall Street Journal folded neatly on his lap. And Cassie, looking effortlessly chic even through a screen. "Lexi, dear," my mother began, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "What a surprise!" "Hi, everyone," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "Caleb and I have some exciting news we wanted to share." I held up my hand, letting the simple, elegant ring Caleb had designed catch the light. "We're getting married." For a moment, there was just silence. Not the happy, breathless kind, but a heavy, awkward pause. Cassie was the first to speak, a perfectly arched eyebrow raised. "Oh, wow, congratulations, I guess." Then, my mother. "Well, that is news." I ignored the lukewarm reception and pressed on, my hope already beginning to fray. I shared my screen, showing them pictures of the winery in the Shenandoah Valley, the rolling hills, the rustic barn, the beautiful oak trees. "We're planning a small, intimate ceremony in the fall. We wanted something that felt like us." The silence returned, thicker this time. My mother cleared her throat. "Virginia?" she asked, her tone laced with disapproval. "Why on earth there? It's terribly inconvenient for everyone in D.C." Cassie chimed in, a smirk playing on her lips. "A farm wedding. How unique, Lexi." The message was crystal clear. It wasn't grand enough. It wasn't impressive enough. It wasn't a wood wedding. The knot in my stomach tightened, but I held my ground. "We've set a date," I said, my voice firmer now. "October 14th. That's when my mother physically reached for her leather-bound planner. As she did, I noticed something over her shoulder. On a large whiteboard behind her desk, written in bright, cheerful marker, was a detailed itinerary under the heading, Maui Family Getaway. My blood ran cold. "Oh, I'm so sorry, Lexi, but that weekend is just impossible," she said, feigning regret as she flipped through the pages. "Your father has a partners conference, I have a major university fundraiser, and Cassie is in the middle of a critical project at her firm. The timing is just dreadful." "Mom, it's 4 months away," I said, my voice pleading. "People can move things for a wedding." My father finally spoke, his voice laced with the impatience he reserved just for me. "Lexi, be reasonable. We can't ask Cassie, a rising star at a big law firm, to put her entire career on hold for this thing. This thing." The words hung in the air, a verbal dismissal of my entire life, my love, my future. My wedding was just an inconvenient thing. I felt the last of my hope shatter. I looked at their 3 faces on my screen. the faces of the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. And I asked the question I already knew the answer to. So, none of you can make it. Not one. The silence that followed was the longest of my life. It stretched and expanded until I thought my phone would crack from the pressure. My father looked at my mother. My mother looked at Cassie. No one wanted to deliver the final blow. So, my father did. He leaned forward, his expression hardening into the cold, dismissive mask I knew so well. His voice was low, devoid of any warmth, and dripping with a contempt that was centuries old. "Let's be realistic, Lexi," he said. "It's a trivial event for a common soldier. Our lives and Cassie's career simply have more important priorities." The screen in front of me seemed to fracture into a million pieces. Common soldier, he'd finally said it. The words he had been thinking my entire life, the brand he had seared onto my soul, were now out in the open. It wasn't a rejection, it was an execution. A formal declaration that my worth, in their eyes, was zero. Something inside me shifted. The pain was so sharp, so absolute, that it broke through the other side into a terrifying calm. I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was a soldier in a combat zone, and my emotions were a liability. I remembered a line from survival training. When you're trapped, don't waste energy trying to move the obstacle. Find a new path. My path was suddenly, brutally clear. I looked straight into the camera, meeting the gaze of the three people who had wounded me more than any enemy ever could. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I kept my tone perfectly level, a flat line of emotion. "I understand," I said. "I understand your priorities perfectly." And then I ended the call. I sat there, my phone dark in my hand, the silence of our small apartment rushing in to fill the void. I didn't move for a long time. Caleb came over and wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder. He didn't say anything. He just held me. I leaned back into his warmth, the only warmth I had ever truly known. I didn't shed a tear. I just whispered, the words barely audible. "They're not coming." He held me tighter. Then I straightened up, pulling away gently. I looked at him, and the broken-hearted girl was gone. In her place was a sergeant. My eyes were hard, my jaw set. "And I don't need them," I said, my voice filled with a cold, clear certainty. "This wedding is happening, with or without them." I walked over to the small desk in the corner of our living room. Our wedding invitations were stacked in a neat pile, waiting to be addressed. I picked up the top one, an elegant card printed with our names and the date. Then I picked up a black Sharpie. With a steady hand, I drew a thick, deliberate line through the names of Preston, Victoria, and Cassandra Wood on the guest list. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of survival. It was the end of an illusion, and the first day of my freedom. The months that followed our wedding were the most peaceful of my life. It was a quiet born from a conscious decision. I blocked their numbers. I created a filter that sent any email from their accounts directly to a folder I never opened. It was a digital amputation, and with it came an unfamiliar sense of freedom. The constant low-grade hum of anxiety I had lived with my entire life, the pressure to please, to be enough, simply vanished. Life with Caleb was simple and good. We spent our weekends working in his woodshop, hiking the trails near the Blue Ridge Mountains, or just cooking dinner together in our small kitchen. I poured my energy into my work at Fort Belvoir, earning a commendation from my commanding officer for a detailed intelligence brief I'd prepared. I was building a life on my own terms, a life based on the values my grandfather had instilled in me: honor, integrity, and hard work. The silence from the Wood family was a balm, and I foolishly allowed myself to believe that they had finally, truly, let me go. I was wrong. The storm broke on a Tuesday morning. It started with a single voicemail. My phone buzzed, displaying a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring out. The notification popped up. New voicemail. I pressed play and my blood ran cold. It was my father. But it wasn't the booming, arrogant voice of Preston Wood, K Street lawyer. This voice was thin, strained and trembling with a raw panic I had never heard before. Lexi, Lexi, call me back the second you get this. It's an emergency. Click. An hour later, another one. Lexi, please, I need to talk to you. It's about the Scottsdale investment. Click. A third voicemail arrived just before lunch, his voice now cracking with desperation. For God's sake, Lexi, pick up the phone. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. The Scottsdale investment. It was a high-end resort development project in Arizona he'd roped me into a few years back. I had been hesitant, but he'd been so convincing. It's just a formality, honey, he had said, sliding the papers across his mahogany desk. With your military record, the bank will approve the loan in a heartbeat. It makes the whole portfolio look more stable. He had used the very career he despised as a tool for his own gain. When the fourth call came, I answered. I put the phone on speaker, and Caleb, hearing the tension in the air, came and stood behind me, placing a steadying hand on my shoulder. Lexi, finally, my father gasped, sounding breathless. What's wrong, Dad? I asked, my voice calm. It's the Scottsdale deal. It's collapsed, Lexi. The whole thing went under. The bank is calling the loan. They're going to sue us. Us. The word struck me. He so rarely used that word when it came to me. It was always me and your mother, or the family. Us was reserved for times of crisis, a verbal rope to pull me back into his orbit. Initially, he tried to spin a web of excuses. It was the volatile housing market, a dishonest business partner, unforeseen construction delays. But I wasn't the naive girl from his living room anymore. I was a trained intelligence analyst. When was the last payment made on the loan? I asked, my tone even. I don't have the exact date in front of me. And what was the reason for the cash flow problem? The market has been stable in that sector for the last 6 months. He stammered, caught off guard by my direct, analytical questions. He was used to my silence, not my scrutiny. Pinned into a corner, the dam of his lies finally broke, and a torrent of brazen truth came flooding out. All right, fine, he snapped, his panic turning to anger. There was a temporary cash flow issue, the Hawaii trip. It was more expensive than we anticipated, and I just helped Cassie with the down payment on her new penthouse in Manhattan. I thought I could move some things around, that the market would bounce back before the next payment was due. I was speechless. The air left my lungs in a silent gasp. He had taken the money that was supposed to secure a loan with my name on it, and used it to fund the very vacation they chose over my wedding, and to buy a luxury apartment for the sister they always chose over me. He had gambled with my financial future to reward his golden child, and now that the bet had failed, he was calling me to clean up his mess. But the worst was yet to come. The peak of his audacity was still to be scaled. Lexi, I need your help, he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You're a soldier. You have a stable income, steady savings. You're not frivolous with your money. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head as he reframed the daughter he once called a common soldier into a responsible financial asset. I need you to wire me $40,000 immediately. It's just to retain the lawyers, to stop the bleeding. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was so outrageously hypocritical, so breathtakingly arrogant, that it transcended anger and became almost darkly comedic. The man who had dismissed my life as trivial was now begging for my help, praising the very discipline and stability that my common soldier career had provided. I remembered a core principle from my training: never act on emotion. Gather all available intelligence first. There was a long pause on the line. I let him stew in it, his ragged breathing the only sound. Finally, I spoke. My voice was as cold and flat as a steel plate. There was no anger, no pain, just the clipped precision of an analyst stating a fact. I will need to see all of the paperwork, Father, every loan document, every bank statement, every email correspondence related to this investment. Lexi, there's no time for that. The bank is... I will call you back, I interrupted, my voice leaving no room for argument, after I have had a chance to review all of the information. I hung up the phone before he could say another word. My hand, when I placed it on the table, was perfectly steady. The shock had passed. The hurt was a distant echo. What remained was a cold, hard resolve. I was no longer the target. I was the mission commander. I looked up at Caleb, who was watching me with a mixture of anger and awe. "Can you help me find a good lawyer?" I asked. "A really good one. I need to prepare." That night, our living room transformed into a tactical operations center. My father, true to his word, had his assistant email over a mountain of password-protected PDF files containing the investment records. I retrieved the old metal lockbox from the back of my closet, my personal Pandora's box, containing my original copies of the documents he'd had me sign years ago. Caleb helped me spread everything across the hardwood floor. Under the warm glow of our reading lamp, the stacks of paper, loan agreements, partnership contracts, bank statements, looked like the blueprints of a battlefield. To anyone else, it was a chaotic mess of financial jargon. To me, it was a grid map, and I was looking for the enemy's position. Caleb sat quietly on the sofa, a silent sentinel. He kept my coffee mug full and warm, his presence a comforting weight in the room. He didn't offer advice or try to interfere. He just trusted me. That trust was the armor I needed for the battle ahead. I was no longer the wounded daughter. I was Sergeant Wood on a critical mission, and this was my intelligence-gathering phase. I remembered a quote from Sun Tzu's The Art of War, a book we'd studied at the academy. "Know your enemy and know yourself, and you will not be imperiled in 100 battles." Tonight, I was getting to know my enemy. With the focus of an analyst sifting through raw data, I began my work. I cross-referenced dates, highlighted figures, and made notes in the margins. For hours, I traced the flow of money, creating a timeline. The story that emerged from the numbers was colder and more calculated than I could have ever imagined. With the help of an old army buddy who now worked as a forensic accountant, I got access to the detailed, unredacted loan statements. The picture became brutally clear. The mortgage payments hadn't just been late, they had stopped completely 4 months prior. The date of the last successful payment was May 15th. I pulled up my father's credit card statements, which he had foolishly included in the document dump. The charge for a family vacation package to the Four Seasons Resort in Maui for $25,000 was dated May 17th. 2 days. He had made the final payment to keep the loan from defaulting, and then just 2 days later, he had consciously decided to spend the next month's payment, and much more, on a luxury vacation with his favored child, fully aware that it would push the investment and my name into delinquency. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a cash flow problem. It was a choice. He had deliberately sacrificed my financial security for their pleasure. The pain of that discovery was a sharp, physical blow. But I didn't have time for pain. I pushed it down, converting it into cold, hard fuel. I kept digging. And then I found it. The secret weapon. It was buried deep in a chain of old emails between my father and his business partner. My father had forwarded the entire thread, too panicked to edit it. In an email dated a week before I signed the papers, his partner expressed concern about taking on such a large loan. My father's reply made the hair on my arms stand up. He wrote, "Don't worry, my daughter in the Army is co-signing. She's very compliant and won't ask too many questions. Consider her our safe bet." Compliant. A safe bet. I read the words over and over. He hadn't just taken advantage of my trust. He had planned it from the beginning. He had profiled me, assessed my loyalty as a weakness, and used it as a selling point to his partner. I wasn't his daughter in that email. I was a pawn, a tool, a simple-minded asset to be leveraged. That email, combined with the bank statements, was everything. It was incontrovertible proof of premeditated manipulation. Caleb must have seen the look on my face. "What is it, Lexi?" he asked softly. I couldn't speak. I just turned the laptop screen towards him. He read the email, and a low growl rumbled in his chest. He stood up and wrapped his arms around me. "Whatever you decide to do," he whispered into my hair, "I'm with you. But you owe them nothing. You hear me?" Nothing. The next morning, we drove to Richmond to meet with a civil litigation attorney Caleb's friend had recommended. Her name was Ms. Eleanor Vance, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 50s with eyes that seemed to see right through you. I didn't present my story with tears or emotion. I laid out the facts logically, chronologically, placing the highlighted bank statements and the printed-out email on her polished conference table. I was giving a mission briefing. She listened intently, her fingers steepled, not interrupting once. When I finished, she reviewed the documents in silence. After a long moment, she looked up at me, not with pity, but with a kind of fierce respect. "Sergeant," she said, her voice firm, "this isn't just gross negligence. By knowingly misrepresenting the use of funds and your role in this, he engaged in fraudulent inducement. You don't just have grounds to refuse payment, you have grounds to countersue." I shook my head. "I don't want his money. I don't want a lawsuit. I just want out. I want my name cleared, and I want this to be over." I paused, taking a deep breath. "And I need to be the one to tell him." A slow, appreciative smile spread across Ms. Vance's face. "I understand completely." She squared the papers into a neat pile. "All right then, let's prepare you for battle." As we walked through the strategy, I felt a strange sense of calm. The truth is a powerful weapon. It doesn't scream or rage, it just is. And I had it on my side. There's a unique power in finding that one piece of cold, hard proof. That text, that email, that forgotten letter. That confirms everything you suspected. If you've ever had that moment of discovery, that feeling of finding your own secret weapon, press the like button and comment with a single key emoji below. When we finished, Ms. Vance looked at me, a question in her eyes. "Are you sure you're ready for this? He won't make it easy." I thought of the little girl in the attic, the young soldier in the desert, the bride staring at an empty chair. They were all standing behind me, lending me their strength. I met her gaze, and my voice was steady, without a hint of doubt. "I'm ready," I said. "Set up the call with him." We set the stage with tactical precision. Ms. Vance scheduled the conference call for 5:30 p.m. on a Friday. I knew my father's defenses would be at their lowest then, worn down by a long week, impatient to start his weekend. This wasn't going to be a daughter calling her father. This was a planned military engagement. I sat at our small dining table, which for the evening had become my command center. Caleb sat next to me, his hand resting firmly on my knee under the table, a silent anchor. My laptop was open, the key documents displayed on the screen. Ms. Vance was on the line, her presence confirmed, her microphone muted. She was my silent overwatch, ready to intervene only if necessary. I took a deep, steadying breath, the kind I take before a mission briefing. I remembered the core principle of negotiation training. Always maintain the higher ground by controlling your emotions. The first person to lose their cool is the one who loses the war. I pressed the button to dial his number. He picked up on the first ring, his voice frayed with a week's worth of anxious waiting. "Lexi, finally, did you get the money?" I ignored the question completely. There was no room for pleasantries. The operation had begun. My voice was level, cold, and devoid of any emotion. "Father, I've reviewed the documents. I have a few questions for you before we proceed." The unexpected formality threw him off. "Questions? What questions? This is straightforward, Lexi." I cut him off, my tone precise and unyielding. "I'm presenting the facts as I have them. According to the bank statements, the final successful payment on the Scottsdale loan was made on May 15th. Is that correct?" I suppose so. I don't have it in front of me," he stammered. "I do," I stated flatly. 2 days later, on May 17th, a charge for $25,000 was made on your credit card to the Four Seasons Resort in Maui. Can you explain that correlation for me? A heavy silence filled the line. I could almost hear the frantic whirring of the gears in his mind as he tried to formulate a defense. I didn't give him the chance. I pressed the attack. "Furthermore," I continued, my voice like ice, "I have an email you sent to your business partner a week before I signed the loan agreement. In it, you refer to me as, and I quote, very compliant and a safe bet who wouldn't ask too many questions. Could you please clarify what, exactly, a safe bet means in this context, father? The dam broke. His carefully constructed facade of a powerful, in-control lawyer crumbled into dust. He began to sputter, a flurry of denials and deflections. That's taken out of context. How dare you access my private correspondence? What are you accusing me of? I am not accusing you of anything, I replied, my voice dangerously calm. I am presenting the data. The data shows that you intentionally defaulted on a loan that I co-signed to pay for a vacation, after you had already identified me as an easy target for manipulation. His panic morphed into pure rage. It was the last defense of a man who had been cornered by the truth. Who do you think you are, talking to me like this? He roared into the phone. I am your father. I don't have time for these games. I need $40,000, and as my daughter, it is your responsibility to help this family. That was the moment. The trigger word, responsibility. A small, mirthless smirk touched my lips. It was a cold, sharp feeling. Family responsibility? I asked, letting the question hang in the air for a beat. That's an interesting choice of words. I leaned forward, my voice dropping but losing none of its intensity. When I needed my family at my wedding, I was told it was, and I believe the exact words were, a trivial event for a common soldier. I was told that your lives had more important priorities. I paused, letting my words sink in, twisting the knife he himself had sharpened. I could hear his ragged breathing on the other end of the line. He was losing control. He knew he was losing. He made one last desperate attempt, resorting to the only weapon he had left, emotional blackmail. What are you doing, Lexi? He pleaded, his voice suddenly pathetic. Are you really going to destroy this family over some childish grudge? Your mother will be devastated by this. She'll be so disappointed in you. But his threats were hollow now. They couldn't hurt me anymore. I had the truth, and the truth was my shield. The little girl who craved his approval was gone. In her place was a woman who was about to define her own terms. Well then, I said, my voice as final as a judge's gavel. I suppose this is a trivial matter for me now too. I've decided that your financial crisis, which you created, is not my priority. Lexi, don't you dare. I will not be sending you one single cent, I declared, cutting him off for the last time. My attorney, Ms. Vance, who has been listening to this entire conversation, will be in contact with the bank to begin the process of having my name legally removed from this fraudulent loan. Good luck with your priorities, father. And with that, before he could utter another word, another threat, another pathetic plea, I ended the call. The silence in the room was absolute. My hand was still resting on my phone. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, a tremor started in my fingers. It traveled up my arm, into my shoulders, until my whole body was shaking. It wasn't a tremor of fear or sadness. It was the violent, uncontrollable aftershock of adrenaline. It was the feeling of a soldier after the battle is won, when the body finally releases the tension it has been holding for a lifetime. It was the feeling of being, at long last, free. The adrenaline shakes had barely subsided when my phone, which I'd left on the table, lit up and began to vibrate violently. The aftershocks were beginning. The caller ID read, Mother. I let it ring, the shrill sound cutting through the fragile peace. It stopped and immediately started again. Caleb looked at me, his eyes asking a silent question. I gave a small nod, took a deep breath, and answered, putting it on speaker. I didn't even have a chance to say hello. How could you do that to your father? The voice that erupted from the speaker was not the polished, composed tone of Victoria Wood, Dean of Humanities at Georgetown. It was a raw, hysterical shriek, laced with venom. He is a complete wreck. Do you have any idea how hard he has worked to give you and your sister the life you have? You are the most ungrateful, selfish child I have ever known. I let the storm of her words wash over me. I didn't flinch. I didn't argue. I waited for her to pause, to gasp for another breath of self-righteous air. When the moment came, my voice was quiet, almost clinical. Mother, I said calmly. Were you aware of the email he sent to his business partner? The silence on the other end was deafening. It was a silence filled with guilt and complicity. That's not the point, she finally stammered, her rage deflating into a weak defense. And there it was. She knew. She had always known. She was a part of it. The betrayal wasn't just his, it was theirs. Goodbye, Mother, I said, and ended the call. Before the screen had even gone dark, it lit up again. This time, it was Cassie. If my mother's attack was a chaotic hailstorm, my sister's was a sniper's bullet, precise and condescending. Lexi, I am so deeply disappointed in you, she began, her big law attorney voice in full effect. You're acting incredibly childish. Do you have any concept of the kind of pressure that successful people like Mom and Dad are under? For the first time that night, I laughed. It was a short, bitter sound. Pressure, Cassie? Are you talking about the pressure of funding a Hawaiian vacation and a down payment on your Manhattan penthouse? Do you have any idea that money was supposed to be paying off a loan that I was on the hook for? She sidestepped the accusation with the practiced ease of a seasoned lawyer. Don't drag those details into this. That's not what this is about. The point is, you are turning your back on your family. No, Cassie, I corrected her, my voice sharp and clear. I am drawing a boundary. Maybe you should try it sometime, instead of living your entire life in their shadow. I hung up before she could respond. The weight of it all was beginning to press down on me, a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. But the hurricane was far from over. Over the next few days, the full force of their propaganda machine was unleashed. My phone became a weapon used against me, buzzing relentlessly with text messages from aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't spoken to in years. It was clear my parents had been busy, spinning a carefully crafted narrative. In their version, I was the villain. Lexi, the stubborn, unfeeling soldier who had become bitter and was now cruelly abandoning her loving parents in their time of need. A text from my Aunt Carol read, "Family is supposed to be there for each other in hard times, honey. Don't let your anger blind you to what's important." Another, from a cousin in California, "Heard about what's going on. Just remember everything they've done for you." Each message was a small paper cut designed to make me bleed guilt. A few years ago, it would have worked. I would have been crushed by their disapproval. But now, as I read the words, I felt something different. It was a deep, profound sadness, but it wasn't the sharp sting of personal pain. I was sad for them. Sad that they were all trapped in this toxic system, rushing to defend the very people who enforced the rules of a game I was no longer willing to play. Through it all, Caleb was my rock. He sat with me on the couch, reading every single message, his jaw tightening with each one. He didn't tell me to ignore them. He just absorbed the blows with me. He was my fortress. And in a fortress, sometimes reinforcements arrive from the most unexpected places. My phone rang one evening, an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Lexi, it's your cousin, Mark." Mark. We hadn't spoken in probably a decade. He was the family black sheep, the one who'd dropped out of college to become a musician. "I heard what happened," he said, his voice quiet. "And I just wanted to call and say, don't listen to any of them. You did the right thing. It's about damn time someone stood up to them." Tears pricked my eyes. To be seen, to be understood, by someone from inside the system. It was a gift. The final call came the next day, at my desk at Fort Belvoir. It was my commanding officer, the same man who had walked me down the aisle. "Sergeant Wood," he said, his voice warm but professional. "I heard you're dealing with a difficult family matter. I'm not calling to pry. I'm calling to tell you that what you did took courage and integrity. The Army is proud of you." His words landed like a bomb on a burn. Honor, integrity, courage. The very values my family had never understood were the ones that my chosen family was now celebrating. His validation, my cousin's validation, Caleb's unwavering support. That was the only approval I needed. I realized then what Eleanor Roosevelt meant when she said, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." I had finally withdrawn my consent. That night, my phone was still buzzing intermittently on the nightstand. a constant, low-level harassment from a world I no longer belonged to. I picked it up, looking at the screen full of their names. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel much of anything. I just felt done. With a steady hand, I pressed and held the power button. The screen flickered, asking for confirmation. I swiped right. The screen went black. And for the first time in days, there was silence. The silence that followed the black screen of my phone was unlike any I had ever known. It wasn't just the absence of ringing or buzzing. It was a profound, echoing quiet that filled every corner of our small house. The war was over. I had won. But there was no victory parade, no feeling of triumph. There was only the crushing weight of exhaustion, the kind that settles deep in your bones after a long deployment, when the adrenaline finally drains away and leaves nothing but an empty, hollow space behind. I had spent my entire life fighting an invisible war for their approval. And now that it had ended, I didn't know what to do with the peace. Caleb, with his quiet wisdom, understood. He didn't try to cheer me up or fill the silence with platitudes. He simply brought me a steaming mug of chamomile tea, sat beside me on the sofa, and shared the silence with me as we watched the evening settle over our backyard. His presence was a language all its own, and it said, "I'm here. You're not alone." As a soldier, I was trained to recognize when a situation required backup. You don't charge into an ambush alone, and you don't navigate the minefield of trauma without a guide. I knew this was a battle I couldn't win by myself. The Army teaches you to be tough, but it also provides resources for the wounds you can't see. The next week, I made a call to Military OneSource and scheduled an appointment with a psychologist. In the safety of that quiet, sterile office, surrounded by bland landscape paintings and the soft hum of an air conditioner, I finally allowed myself to break. For the first time, I didn't hold it in. I didn't swallow my tears. I wept. I wept for the little girl in the attic, who thought her love for maps and history was weird. I wept for the teenager who celebrated her high school graduation with pizza because her parents were at a more important party. I wept for the bride who stood before her husband with an empty front row where her family should have been. My therapist, a kind, steady woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, listened without judgment. She helped me understand that my profound sadness wasn't a sign of weakness or regret for the choice I'd made. It was grief. "You're mourning a profound loss, Lexi," she explained gently. "It's not the loss of the family you had. It's the loss of the family you should have had. You are grieving an idea, an ideal, and that is one of the deepest griefs a person can carry." She introduced me to the work of Brené Brown, a researcher I'd heard of but never studied. I watched her talks on vulnerability, courage, and shame. The idea of daring greatly, of having the courage to show up and be seen even when there are no guarantees, it resonated with the core of my being. I realized that drawing that final boundary with my family wasn't an act of anger. It was my ultimate act of courage. During one session, Dr. Sharma suggested an exercise: write a letter to my father, mother, and sister. A letter I would never send. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table and I wrote. I filled pages, my pen flying across the paper. I wrote about the sting of being called a common soldier, the public humiliation of their Hawaii vacation, the cold, calculated betrayal of the Scottsdale investment. I poured every ounce of pain, rage, and confusion onto the pages. But as I wrote, something shifted inside me. The fiery anger began to cool, replaced by something unexpected, a sad, distant pity. I saw them not as monstrous villains, but as deeply flawed people trapped in a golden cage of their own making. A cage built from status, appearances, and the fear of ever being seen as ordinary. They would never know the unconditional love of a chosen family, the quiet honor of service, or the simple joy of a life lived authentically. They were the ones who were truly impoverished. When I finished writing, I took the stack of papers out to the small fire pit in our backyard. Under a canopy of stars, I lit a match. I watched as the flames licked at the edges of the paper, curling the words of my pain into blackened ash. The fire consumed the insults, the neglect, the betrayals. It was a funeral for the life I had left behind. and a baptism for the one I was just beginning to build. In the following months, Caleb and I consciously cultivated our chosen family. Our house, once a quiet refuge, became a hub of warmth and laughter. We hosted weekend barbecues, the air filled with the smell of grilled burgers and the sound of Caleb's classic rock playlist. My closest friends from the base would come, their kids running around the yard with Caleb's friends from his woodworking guild. There were no pretenses, no judgments, no discussions of Ivy League schools or K Street law firms. We talked about our lives, our struggles, our small victories. One Saturday afternoon, surrounded by these wonderful, genuine people, my friend Sergeant Miller, a tough-as-nails woman I'd served with, raised her beer bottle. "A toast," she said, her voice clear and strong. "To Lexi Wood, who taught us all that the greatest courage isn't always shown on the battlefield." Looking at the smiling, supportive faces around me, I finally understood. I had never been truly alone. I had a family. A real one. Built not on blood or obligation, but on mutual respect, shared values, and unconditional love. A few weeks later, a wave of dizziness washed over me at my desk. I chalked it up to exhaustion, but it happened again the next day. A small, persistent thought began to form in the back of my mind. That evening, my hands trembling slightly, I took a home pregnancy test into the bathroom. I set it on the counter, my heart pounding against my ribs as I waited for the result. When the second pink line appeared, faint but unmistakable, I stared at it, my breath caught in my throat. It was the future. An entirely new chapter, arriving unannounced, ready to be written. 2 years passed after the confrontation. 2 years of quiet, steady, intentional peace. The silence that had once felt like a hollow void was now filled with the rich, warm sounds of a life being built. The scene is our backyard in Fredericksburg on a warm Saturday in late summer. I'm not in uniform anymore. I'm wearing a simple blue sundress, the fabric soft against my skin. In my arms, I'm holding a little girl with a mess of dark hair and eyes that hold a fierce, determined spark. My daughter, Willow. She is just over a year old, and she is the center of my universe. The air smells of freshly cut grass and grilling hamburgers. Caleb is at the barbecue, a faded band t-shirt on, humming along to some classic rock station on the radio. The sound of our friends' laughter echoes from the patio, a joyful noise that has become the soundtrack to our new life. This is it. This is the picture of the peace I fought for. Not a grand, dramatic victory, but something quiet, something real. There is no performance, no pressure to impress, just the simple, profound joy of being surrounded by genuine love. My relationship with the Wood family, as I now thought of them, had changed. It hadn't magically healed, but it had shifted into something new, something fragile and uncertain. After a long silent year, my mother had called. It was the day after I told her I was pregnant. The voice on the other end of the line was different, stripped of its usual academic authority. For the first time, I heard a vulnerability in it, a crack in the polished veneer. They came to visit after Willow was born. There was no grand apology, no tearful reconciliation. The wounds were too deep for that. But their actions spoke in a language their words never could. They arrived with gifts that were thoughtfully chosen, not just expensive, a handmade wooden rocking horse Caleb had admired, a first-edition copy of Goodnight Moon. During their visit, I watched my mother, Victoria, a woman who once treated a speck of dust like a personal insult, get down on her hands and knees on the living room floor to play with Willow, her laughter soft and unfamiliar. I watched my father, Preston, the powerful K Street lawyer, sit in the rocking chair for nearly an hour, not talking, not reading, just watching his granddaughter sleep, his face a mask of complex emotions I couldn't quite decipher. The most surreal moment came one afternoon. My father was holding Willow, awkwardly, as if he were holding a delicate, priceless piece of art. He was a man who had always been so sure, so commanding. But he seemed utterly disarmed by this tiny human being. He looked from Willow's face to mine, and his voice was quiet when he spoke. "She has your eyes," he said, a strange hoarseness in his throat. "They're very determined." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a confession. But it was the closest thing to an acknowledgement to seeing me that I had ever received from him. It was a single crack of light in a lifetime of shadows. A fragile truce had been called. I didn't know if it would last, but for the sake of the little girl in his arms, I was willing to let it exist. The true moment of healing, however, didn't come from them. It came from within me. One quiet Tuesday afternoon, it was just Willow and me in the house. She was taking wobbly, triumphant steps across the living room, a look of intense concentration on her face. Then, as toddlers do, her feet got tangled and she tumbled onto the soft rug. It wasn't a bad fall, but it was a shock. Her face crumpled and a heartbreaking wail filled the room. Without a second thought, I scooped her up, pulling her tight against my chest. I rocked her gently, stroking her soft hair. "Oh, my sweet girl," I whispered into her ear, my voice thick with an emotion that surprised me. "It's okay, baby. Mommy's here. You're safe. I love you so much." And then, it hit me. The words I was speaking, the comfort I was giving so instinctively, they were the exact words I'd spent a lifetime starving to hear. The unconditional reassurance, the promise of safety, the simple, powerful declaration of love. Tears began to stream down my face, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of a profound, soul-deep healing. In that moment, comforting my daughter, I was also comforting the little girl inside of me who had cried alone in her attic. By becoming a different kind of mother, I was mending my own broken pieces. I was breaking the cycle. The legacy of coldness, of conditional value, of emotional neglect. It stopped here. With me, my legacy, the one I would pass on, would be one of unconditional love. The story ends here, in this quiet, peaceful place. I'm in Willow's nursery, the room painted a soft sage green. The moonlight streams through the window, casting a gentle glow on her crib. She's sleeping soundly, her tiny chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. I watch her, my heart so full it feels like it might burst. They once called me a common soldier, and maybe, in a way, they were right. I didn't fight in a famous, glorified war. I fought in the quiet, brutal trenches of a broken heart. I fought for the right to define my own worth, and I won. My life is no longer a battle for their approval. My legacy is not the Wood family name or the achievements they value. My legacy is this sleeping child. It's the peace in this house. It's the love that I have built from the ashes of my past. Out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. And finally, after all the storms, I have found my way home. Thank you for walking this path with me. My story is a testament to the fact that our past does not have to define our future. It's about breaking cycles and forging our own legacy of strength and love. Now, I'd love to hear from you. In the comments below, share one word that defines the legacy you are building for yourself. Whether it's kindness, courage, or peace, let's fill this space with inspiration. If my journey resonated with you, please consider liking this story and subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us share more stories of resilience, creating a community where we can all feel seen and heard. Thank you for listening.